a family property, you turn into property. And but she says this is her brother and sister, and so she says, but if Avalon and Donovan, like if we were all there, like they'd still get to be my brother and sister, like we'd be together. Well, not necessarily, but like if Daddy came out of the woods, you know, she's asking all these questions. So when her father comes home, he is clearly not expecting to walk into the door to the middle passage, but that's exactly what happens. And we have this amazing discussion about, you know, how does he feel about that? Like, and it's not that there wasn't any magic that happened here, right? But it was just, she saw the system. She saw, as abstracted as it was, and it made something feel much more real to her. And so this game ended up being the New World, and it was the first game in the Mechanic as a Message series. And so I had never seen games do something like this before, like ever. And so I was, you know, for me it was like, oh my God, this is like, watching what it had done, I was like, I'm going to do this immediately again. And I literally that night started on another game, which was about where my family came from. You can probably guess where my family came from with this name. So my family comes in, he was born on St. Patrick's Day, go figure. And so my family comes from West Cork, from Skibbereen. And so I wanted to make a game about how we ended up in the United States. And so this is the very first prototype of this game. So it starts with a Cromwellian invasion of Ireland. The game starts where there's two sides playing the game. The game starts with you've already lost the game. The English have actually won the game. And so your job is to find out who loses the least. And so it was an amazing experience as a designer. I spent my life in spreadsheets, mostly. In spreadsheets or, you know, with a controller and my eyes closed, thinking about how the game is going to play. But in this case, I'm actually trying to find like the right color of green. And I decided that even after Cromwell, the English financed Cromwell's invasion, but in return for land, but they never actually came, so I abstracted them as blocks. And then they rented the land back to the Irish people. And so I took the Irish families that had passed away and I, wrapped them in this burlap. And originally, this is the base of the game. I originally had wanted the game to be like, I want this to be Earth, like actual Earth. And then, wonderfully, one of my friends, John Sharp, he's at Parsons, he said, do you expect people to water your game, Brenda? Like, this is, probably you've gone too far. So I think about getting this really lush velvet. And then I remembered growing up where no matter what it was we got, my mother would be like, can we get that cheaper? We'd probably get that used. Do you really need that? And I thought, I'm going to find the absolute cheapest fabric. And so what you were looking at is burlap. And this entire game is held up by this twine. Burlap, almost everything in the game is used. And I actually knitted the grass. So that was probably the one and only time something like that will happen in my career. And that's the game that ended up, so that's a fairly big sheet of glass there that's held up by 4 nails. And this game is currently at the National Museum of Play in Rochester in the US. So it's about just eventually conquest of Ireland. So this really opened my eyes that games can be so much more than what I thought they could be. And I don't even know what to call these games. I start calling them documentary games because that's what I feel like I'm doing. Like I'm figuring what was the system that caused this to happen, and I'm documenting the system. And I guess also documentaries tend not to get picked up by publishers, and they also tend not to make much money. So that worked out perfectly in this case. And unlike books or movies, I really start getting into this because games are systems. And those systems involve the player, and they also educate the player, and they also create complicity in the outcome. And that I was particularly interested in. And so for me, I'm seeing games, this is after 25 years, I'm seeing games do something I have never seen them do before. And so the third game in the series, and I decided at this point to create 6 games, really based on nothing. I just thought, okay, this sounds like a good number. I had heard of a board game designer who made 6 different games every time he was trying to make one, just to see. He always had 6 games on the go in the belief that one would influence the other. So the next game, the third game in the series, was a game called Train, and it's probably the best known game. And it was in large part for this game that I won a BAFTA. So Train is a game about complicity. It's a game about absolute evil. Basically what it asks is, will people just blindly follow the rules? And if people are blindly following the rules, will other people stop them? Or will they just let them do that, even if they know that very bad things will happen? So Train, interestingly enough, there are 2 people here today who saw it at its very first outing. It was at a Games for Change conference in New York City. And so the game was kind of unknown, and then I talked about it at a conference. And I did not know that there was a recorder in the back of the room. And so The Escapist wrote about this game. And this game is about the Holocaust. And it's about putting, and I didn't even refer, the rules do not refer to it as a game. It is about, will you blindly follow these rules and deliver people to their death? Or will you stop it? Will you break it? Will you do anything you can to save them? The Escapist wrote about it. And so I got invited to bring the game to MIT. And I was terrified the whole time. I really, when The Escapist wrote about it, I thought, like, if I use game developer words, I'm fucking out of this industry. I am never going to get hired again. You can't make games about serious subjects like this. So it's sort of, so Abe Stein wrote about it. And so I got an award from IndieCade. I got their Vanguard Award. But there was also a lot of hate. You stop making games, you're hurting games, this game is insensitive, this game is horrible. The topic of the game is absolutely horrible, I fully agree. We are going to find you, we will punch you in the face. The next game in the series was a game called City Soleil. And I would say, like, Train now is not regarded that way at all. Train, that was 2009. Train is viewed much differently nowadays because a lot of people are making these games. And I want to say, like, I was really brave about it, but I remember calling my husband and saying, like, I'm screwed. Like, I don't even know what I'm going to do. But so City Soleil is about, it's 2 games in one. There's a night game where people come in and they are controlling the people on the board for drug trafficking and for violence and all other kinds of things. And then there's the day game, where the day game you are actually playing those people on the board. So it's quite possible that after the night you come in and your people are gone. And the game is entirely built out of garbage and out of recycled materials. I try to stick as true to things as I can. Like, I got the coins from Haiti as well. The next game in the series was Mexican Kitchen Workers, and this game is going through a pretty large evolution. I went 5 iterations in with Mexican Kitchen Workers. And it was about the beauty and memory of a culture, and how it can be lost and appropriated through its food. I ended up in the 5th iteration. I was happy with it, but during a playtest of it, 2 people fell asleep, and I decided that was probably I needed to go. I needed to go back. The next game was when I think I hit peak game designer insanity. So this is about the Trail of Tears. This was the forced migration of Cherokee and Choctaw, 5 tribes in the U.S. And the way history remembers it is originally there were 20,000 people. But I know this is like, how many people have died on the Trail of Tears? The numbers are all over the place. And so I decided, like, who's keeping those numbers? And when you talk to the Cherokee, people from the Cherokee Nation, my husband's Cherokee, they'll say 17,000 people were lost on the Trail of Tears. So I went from 20,000 and I decided to make 50,000. And these are individual parts. And I figure if you want to play this game, that's what you're going to have to do, is deal with 50,000 pieces. So I tend to respect the subject and listen to the subject. When I'm making these games, it's really, there's nothing commercial about it. I already know from the second I start making a game, I will be spending money, and I don't want to sell them. I've had many opportunities and requests to sell Train, but I think that's abhorrent. Recently, there's a book called Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, and there's a game in it called Solution. And she says to Wired Magazine, certainly that game is a take on Train. She doesn't credit me in the credits. And I'm less upset about that than I am that I just don't think it's acceptable to make money on things like that. So I've never sold Train, I won't sell Train, and eventually Train will be donated to the Museum of Play. And so when I'm working on these games, I'm looking at the images, and so this was working on the game about the Trail of Tears, One Falls for Each of Us. And I'm finding meaning where I see it, whether or not there actually is any. Taking my time, I guess a little bit like I do when I'm writing a piece, like the stuff that I'm writing for my PhD. And when these pieces were drying, there had just been, one of my games takes place in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. I'd already written the rules for that game and tested it a few times. But it's just so happened that there had been this horrible earthquake, so I was initially not paying any attention to these images, but clearly, started to. It's like, as I was working on this. So to me, like, there was this beautiful interconnectedness of it all. And I found like 25 years of commercial game design just evaporated, really. I still have to do that. I'm making it sound bad. It's actually really fun to design games for a living. It's fun to design commercial games. But where I find the soul of the game is really in these games. And at the time, back when I started working on this series, these games didn't really exist. There weren't games like this. Now there are many commercial games that are like that. I even made a game. I like subverting even what games are about. I made a single play game, and I sealed the end game state in a box and entered it into a game competition. They rejected it, which is completely fine because they couldn't play it, but I still liked that. So this game it's called Black Box. It was about an experience I had. It was made in Boston and in New York City. So I really like challenging the notion of what games can be. Like, people even said, well, you have to make multiple copies of Train. I don't, right? Like, there's not multiple copies of paintings, original paintings. There's one, right? So this whole notion of commerciality and commerce is so tied into this medium. So no, it doesn't need to be fun. It doesn't need to be mass produced. It doesn't even need to be public. And I think, like, while the industry itself, we're really good at expressing some things like fear and joy and sadness and wonder, we're exceedingly good at rage. Pride, like, I remember my daughter, she created this Japanese pagoda and she was so proud of herself. And her younger sister was creating like a sand fort on the beach, and she's like, she's got to move it, she's wrecking my view. And so I followed my younger daughter in her little sand fort on the beach. And there was the first time I followed one of my kids in a virtual world, and so I actually so loved her little sand fort that I told my daughter she had to move. But it was one of my best experiences in games. And so these documentary games really showed me a new horizon and even new ways to make games about serious subject matter. This is one of the best games in my entire collection of games, which when we moved to Ireland, the government's customs said we refuse to believe that two people can have that many games. It was probably most of what we moved here. So this is a game called Black Explorers, and it has a fantastic premise. And this is Matthew Henson, and he may have been the first man to reach the North Pole. And I say may because of this color of his skin. It wasn't documented. People didn't care about it. They didn't make sure that this was known. So I really love the concept of Black Explorers. Like, it provides you with 4 guides to help you learn about the explorers. And in theory, your knowledge of these explorers should advance you in the game, or even you could just play as these people and just play as explorers, and you don't have to worry about the more didactic bits, except that's not at all what happens. And if I gave you 10 guesses as to what happens with this game, I bet none of you would still get it unless you've seen this masterwork. Because here's how you actually advance in this game. The answer's inside of the box. That's right, it's math problems. That's how you advance in Black Explorers, is solving long division. So obviously, this is such, and this is, I guess, how things can go wonky. And I don't know about you, but when I'm thinking about really courageous people like Matthew Henson, whose story was largely ignored, putting math problems as the core mechanic, I think, doomed him. And the thing that I'm usually trying to go for when I think about documentary games is that same feeling my mother had when The Miracle on Ice was played, right? Like, this is a game that, this is when the United States faced off against Russia in the Olympics. And I remember my mother crying. Like, and this is around a game. Like, games can do this. Or when the Boston Red Sox won the World Series after 300 years or whatever it was. This was a huge moment. Like, Boston rioted. It was so exciting. They set things on fire, which is, I guess, how people in Boston celebrate. Or, when Deep Blue was playing, right? The first time computers went against Kasparov. And so when we think about stories like Nathan Drake or The Witcher, I think commercial game developers make an assumption that, like, it's got to be fun, it's got to be all these things, and we shy away from these complex topics, like I worked on in my documentary games. It reduces the expressive potential of this entire medium, and this medium is an art form. Like, these are all common core dynamics, and almost every game will fit into these, into one of these. But they also work the other way, right? There's no reason that we can't explore these more difficult topics with games. And, for me, it certainly wasn't on my radar. Every other form of art, photographs, music, all of them, they tackle the full range of the human experience. But for 25 years, I stuck with fun. And I think we need more games like these. So, for me, and I would say since maybe 2010-ish, game developers have started to push these, and particularly indie game developers who just want to make something beautiful, and who want to see games like any other form of art. That they can teach. These are a bunch of pieces from One Falls for Each of Us that they confront. This is a game called Deadbolt by Elizabeth Sampat, and Deadbolt puts 5 people in a circle. And people walk away from this game like crying in a positive way because they've shared something, and it creates this incredibly intimate space. For me, the game I made called Black Box, the single player game, was very healing. And I think games can also challenge us. This is what's called the no Russian scene from Modern Warfare. A lot of people reached out to me about this one, where players are told, no Russians, don't do anything to the Russians when you leave. But what do players do? Well, they do exactly what they do in first-person shooters, and it sort of points to the mindlessness of the genre even. And, we're telling stories that we wouldn't have told before. There's a lot of stories in this world, that don't have to necessarily just be fun, but they're amazing stories nonetheless. Like, probably one of the best stories, certainly the best story I've ever read. There'd be 2 of them, Tide, Lonesome Dove, and East of Eden. Those are amazing stories full of the whole range of the human experience. And, Gone Home, you play through a house, exploring its story as you go. And then there's really incredible games like this War of Mine, which is almost the flip side of something like a Call of Duty. And there's Cart Life and Papers, Please, So we're seeing games, these aren't exactly memoir games, but they provoke and they challenge and they're documenting things. One of the best games to do this, I think, it's a very difficult game to play. It's called That Dragon Cancer. And I used to actually fight with the term game and play, and I just decided to embrace them and try to expand their meaning. But this game, That Dragon Cancer, is about it's a memoir game. It's about the Greens family's struggle with cancer that claimed the life of their son and their faith. They won a BAFTA for it the same year that I won mine, and it deserved every ounce of that BAFTA. Some other games came out in the years that followed. Bury Me, My Love was about the Syrian refugee crisis. It was one of 3 BAFTA-nominated games that year that were about this topic. There's the 1979 Revolution, Black Friday, and this actually uses photography as its main mechanic, and it captures the life of the young people during the 1979 Revolution. There's lots of memoir games that are coming out that are just talking about, there's the short games, like Anna Antropy's Dysphoria, which is about the process of transition. This game has won many awards, including an IGF award. There was one of the earliest games that were called art games. This is Jason Rohrer's Passage. Passage is a 5-minute game about marriage. and closeness, incredibly beautiful. You are literally looking at the entire game right there. Other games, like some of this stuff started to seep its way into commercial games, like, so this is Papa Yo. This is by Vander Caballero, about his father's struggles with alcoholism. And you know, while this experience is obviously not unique to him, he was the first to make a game about it that I know. There have been numerous games that have come out about children in war-torn countries. And even, you know, one of the earliest games was a game by Zoe Quinn called Depression Quest. And, you know, this is it. It's not graphic rich, but it was, you know, basically what happens is this is a person who has depression. And there are all these things that they should select, 1 through 5. But those things are not possible for you to select as you grow more depressed. They're not there anymore. And, you know, or there's Path Out, you know, and again, this is one of the games about people trying to escape from a war situation. And sometimes very difficult subject matter can even be wildly commercially successful. So this is The Binding of Isaac. Many of Ed McMillan's games are somewhat autobiographical in nature. And when I started working on these games, my sister, when I told her what I was working on, she said, "Oh, Brenda, don't do it." I ask her now if she has any other things I should make games about. And I would hear from other people like, you know, but that's not fun. Why would you make that? And I think those questions have gone away largely now. You know, what stories are left to tell? And so for my PhD, I'm writing a memoir, and my memoir is about a life in games, having spent 42 years in the industry. But there's an extra challenge to that, which is I'm telling my life literally in game form. So these are some of my things from my PhD. So this is patch notes. This is my divorce. I wrote a set of patch notes for my divorce. Patch notes was in Tolka. And this is a game called Conception that was also in Tolka. This is about the struggles with infertility, where all this science comes together to make everything work perfectly. And you know, you've got embryos and now IVF and all this stuff, and then you put it in and go, hope it sticks, right? And it was this, you know, this element of randomness, and a board game seemed perfect for that. This game is one that was in the Dublin Review. I made a level design document about where I grew up, 13 separate objects over 55 years at the time. And so that appeared in the Dublin Review. And this one is an interactive narrative, sort of like a choose your own adventure, except not, because that phrase is trademarked, I say happily to the camera. So it's an interactive narrative, and this is about two women who were trafficked that I was acquainted with when I lived in the Caribbean, and their struggles at trying to get out of that situation. And so this is what I'm working on right now. This is my PhD. I keep promising Mads there will be some code showing up at some point in time. But to me, like, what I love about this is there's so much opportunity to explore this. If you wanted to write a book about infertility, right? That infertility and infidelity, by the way, are the two biggest topics. If you can write a book about that, you'll make money. But you're going to be in a shelf that's, well, and if you can write it well and get a publisher. But those shelves are overloaded. But let's talk about the games about infidelity. We could finish that conversation in 5 minutes. Same with infertility, right? Like, some of the biggest topics that affect so many people haven't even showed up in games yet. But I think, you know, at least for me, that it's critical to include the discomfort in these emotional angles, particularly because this is the #1 medium that are among the youth. And, you know, for me, this is all about an opportunity and a challenge, because there's a lot more stories left to tell. So thanks for giving me this opportunity to tell you about my work and games in general. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brenda. That was amazing. Any questions for Brenda? I have a question though, if I may.
You may.
Yeah,
The last time I saw him was at my confirmation, my PhD, my midpoint. It'll be easier than that, I'm sure.
Yes, no, it will be easier. So you mentioned the topics that, you know, at the end, you know, you talked the topics that haven't been addressed in games yet, or you haven't seen, a lot haven't seen either. And I was wondering, are you aware sort of, or you have any sort of emotions in mind that you would say, I would like to address this emotion with that game? Because this idea of the expanding emotional palette is something I experienced too when I played some like Eco the first time, sadness and loss and those types of things that I thought this game evoked particularly well. But it seems that there's a huge emotional palette and we're still only addressing sort of small segments of it.
I think so. Yeah, I two answers in my head. Trust was the first thing that came up. Like, I think if I try to think of everything from a systemic point of view, which will tell you how great I am to be in a relationship with, except my husband's a programmer, so we get along great. But I think about love, like what is the system behind love, and it's progressive trust and building of trust. So things like that, like how can you systematize, what is the system behind these things? That's where I get very fascinated. I have to say, like, the challenge is a lot of my games deal with dark historical matter. And right now, I find it even challenging to consider that, just because of the state of everything that's happening right now. I can look at things that are 30 years or 40 or 50, whatever years past. But I get a lot of people say, are you going to make a game about, the stuff that's happening today? And it's just, it hasn't even settled. I feel like there's far too much dust in the air to even think about that. Powerlessness would be another topic that would be interesting, and I'm more interested in things I don't have any idea how to even approach, like powerlessness. How do you approach powerlessness in games, which is usually about where the core dynamic is taking power? So, I don't know.
It's a big spectrum.
It is, yeah.
Great.
I just want to say more like a comment. Thank you so much, because it seems that you took game as a genre and actually sounded as a voice of an artist to tell people stories about their time. And it's wonderful to see that how game genre expanded and going to documentary addressing those issues in society. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It's so funny you to say that. Yeah.
Thank you for a great talk and pushing the envelope in games. Do you think that these serious issues that you've been addressing through documentary games are going to find their way into the more massive commercial games? Have you seen any movement of, we can actually address more serious issues and not just blow stuff up?
There's nothing wrong with blowing stuff. My husband's had a great career of blowing stuff up. I do, actually. I'm trying to figure out how I can say that. So we're working with a major publisher now, and we're being asked questions and being asked to explore things that I can't even imagine publishers asking about before. Part of my career is like, we can't have women in the game because that's an entire other rig, right? That means we're doubling our voice acting lines, and women don't play games anyway. This is all bullshit, by the way, right? But I'm now hearing people ask questions that, having culture councils, for instance, for games, where you're making sure that you're not making ridiculous decisions and you're not appropriating things.